Barron, last Thursday, Secretary Zinke testified before our full committee, and at the hearing we heard some strong viewpoints from both sides of the aisle as well as from the Secretary himself regarding the Department's budgetary priorities. As you know, payments are made under the Equal Access to Justice Act. They come directly from the agency's budget in most cases. And given the exorbitant attorney's fees that we've heard about that are paid to environmental lawyers under the EJA, sometimes at enhanced rates as high as $750 an hour, in what ways does constant litigation further strain the Department's budget and ultimately hinder its ability to fulfill its core missions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hit your button for me, the talk button, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in all ways, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I mean, the department is initially burdened by a lack of resources. So it's already starting from behind the 8 ball, and then this constant litigation exacerbates that existing problem. I think what's notable is that this body has acted in the past to try to address some of those concerns, and the litigation has continued to undermine those efforts. You know, for example, in the last several years, there have been pilot projects to fund field offices with particularly large permit demands. The cost of a drilling permit on federal lands has been increased over the last several years, and yet those steps have not resulted in any benefits in the field. The field offices are still under stress. As I mentioned in my testimony, we've received anecdotal evidence that one of the real troubling issues for some of these field offices is responding to FOIA requests from these environmental groups, that resources that would be allocated to permitting, permit processing, and managing the lands is being used to respond to FOIA requests and to support litigation efforts.
That's good. Would you describe this as a vicious cycle? And I mean, is that a fair characterization of it? And does the current system, do you think, incentivize more lawsuits being brought against the department?
What I would say, Mr. Chair, is that when we counsel clients who are planning projects on federal lands, that we encourage them to incorporate in their timelines the virtual certainty of litigation delaying the project. I can use as an example a master development plan that was recently approved for a client in the Permian Basin in New Mexico. Master development plans are a tool that BLM emphasizes as streamlining the permitting and environmental review process. Several years of environmental review went into approving the master development plan. Within days of the plan being approved and posted on Carlsbad Field Office's website, there was an environmental challenge to a plan that was subject to public participation for several years. So in our view, people operating on public lands should expect litigation. It is part of operating in that sphere.
Appreciate that. We know that advocacy groups benefit from the receipt of taxpayer dollars through government grants, and then of course they're also receiving uncapped attorney's fees in these lawsuits against the government. In your testimony, you explained that advocacy groups also use litigation as a fundraising tool, which further cements the fact that they have a built-in sort of cottage industry, money-making industry around litigation. Can you elaborate that on just a little more?
Sure. I think you'll note if you look at the publicly available websites for most of the major environmental groups. I mean, they issue a press release and a fundraising request every time that there is a lawsuit filed. And I don't think that it is a controversial opinion. I mean, it has been prevalent in the media that they have acknowledged that they intend to challenge every approval, every permit processing, and every implementation of environmental policy under the new administration. You know, I think that part of that is you can also see from their public releases and from their websites that that has driven fundraising over, particularly in the last quarter. But that's a consistent pattern that we've seen.
Says something about their motives, I think. Mr. Giorgiani, there are concerns about frequent repeat litigants here, and as a matter of fact, our ranking member, Mr. Grijalva, requested a report from the Government Accountability Office that was just released this February. The report, which addresses so-called deadline suits under the Endangered Species Act, found a total of 141 of these suits against the Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service over a 10-year period. Most shockingly, the data revealed that just 2 environmental groups alone were responsible for half of those suits. It took a GAO study on just these types of suits to discover how often these repeat litigants sue. It seems that special interest plaintiffs have developed a strategy around exploiting the Endangered Species Act's vulnerability to litigation. And environmental groups will file an overwhelming number of petitions to review a species for listing, knowing that Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries can't possibly complete the finding in time, giving them an opportunity to sue the agency when the deadline's missed. The same report found that Fish and Wildlife prioritizes completing actions under Section 4 of ECA mandated by settlement agreements resulting from lawsuits. So basically, our federal agencies tasked with protecting our most vulnerable species are prioritizing which species gain protections first because of lawsuits brought on by the same environmental groups that claim to want to protect these species. This is not only devalues the integrity of the ESA, but science in general, and a more centralized case information system might help us better identify these patterns. The question is, I'm out of time, but would this be something you're willing to continue a conversation with the committee on?
I'm not familiar with that specific report, but yes, we welcome the opportunity to continue working with this committee on this very important issue.
I appreciate that. I am out of time for my questions.